We've all had those days. No matter how much we have going on, we just can't find the motivation to get up and get things done. And it's on those days where we fall into this downward spiral and we start feeling bad for ourselves. We know we could be doing something, but we're not. So what does that make us? Undisciplined, lazy, failures, and worst of all, unproductive. What if I told you that there was a way to get out of those ruts and be productive even on your worst days? And on top of that, what if I told you that your definition of productivity has been wrong this whole time? Lucky for you, I'm going over both of those topics in this video, so keep watching. And make sure to watch until the end because I'm going to give you a foolproof method and a few helpful tips that anybody can use to be productive for weeks on end. In today's day and age, we tend to view productivity as simply doing more. We have this idea that the busier we are, the more productive we're being. And because of that, we skip on taking breaks, we ignore work-life balance, we're always adding more to our plate, all in pursuit of staying busy. But this approach couldn't be further from the truth because what often ends up happening is that we end up being busy doing a bunch of things that aren't productive. So let's get into what being productive really means. Productivity is essentially a measure of outputs with a given number of inputs. So it's how much you can produce with the given resources you have. Or to simplify it even further, productivity is a measure of how much you get out with what you put in. So it's super basic, right? At its core, productivity is just a measurement. So how did we end up with this super twisted version of what we consider productivity today, which is always being busy? Well, it's not our fault, and it's actually not even a new concept. In fact, it goes back 200 plus years to the Industrial Revolution and stems from the exploitation of workers. At that time, factory owners were trying to rapidly expand and automate a lot of their processes, so they needed to create more output. The solution? More work. Employees were working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, minimal breaks. They were busier than ever, right? And you know what? It worked. Overall, factories became more productive because they produced more. And economies all over the world saw this transition from primarily manual labor to automation with machines. I mean, it's called the revolution for a reason. So yes, they achieved this, but at what expense? The lives and well-being of millions of workers. Those crazy working conditions during the Industrial Revolution are the reason why we have worker protection laws today. So why is it that we hold ourselves to this same incorrect definition that factory owners were forcing on their workers back then? It just doesn't make sense. So let's go back to that simplified definition of productivity that I mentioned a few moments ago. A measure of how much you get out with what you put in. So here is where most people get tripped up on what productivity is. Basically, because productivity is a measurement of something, if you put anything in and get anything out, you were productive. Now, maybe you weren't the most productive person in the world, and you probably could have been more productive, but you were productive nonetheless. So a few months ago, I came across this LinkedIn post by, I think it was Sahil Bloom, where it said anything above 0 compounds. And this phrase has stuck with me and it's shifted my entire approach to how I work. Essentially, what this phrase means is that any small amount of work towards a goal will add up and eventually lead to large growth over time. So it doesn't matter how small the actions are. As long as you do it consistently and you give it enough time, it will accumulate and lead to big results. And that's the secret. On days where you're just not feeling it or you're just lacking motivation, commit yourself to doing one thing, just one. It doesn't have to be anything major, just make sure you complete one thing. On days when I'm struggling and just feeling unmotivated, this may look like doing some research, writing a script for a bit, brainstorming, maybe even just reading a book so I can learn something. The goal here is to do something and not allow ourselves to have 0 days. Why? Because anything above 0 compounds. Okay, so at this point in the video, you've reframed your mind on what productivity is, and you know the secret to always being productive. Now let's dive into that simple productivity approach that anybody can use. But before we do, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. All right, so the method we're talking about today is something known as the 30 for 30 approach. The idea here is simple. You dedicate 30 minutes a day for 30 days in a row to work on a specific task or goal that you have set. What I love about this approach is that it can be applied to basically anything in life, right? Learning a new language, getting in shape, studying, you name it. And it works for 3 simple reasons. Reason 1 being low intimidation. 30 minutes a day is small enough that basically anyone feels that they have the mental capacity to take it on. It's also small enough that basically anyone can fit it into their schedule. One of the biggest reasons why people don't take steps towards their goals is because it seems too complex. If an approach is too overwhelming or just feels too daunting, then we get intimidated and don't start. But 30 minutes a day is simple and manageable. And even on days when you're just not feeling it, setting a 30-minute timer and getting one thing done is doable for most people. Reason number 2 comes down to commitment. While 30 minutes a day seems simple, minuscule, consistent work for 30 days in a row is significant enough that we have to be mentally invested. It's a commitment that's going to require daily effort. So to use this approach, you really have to be fully committed, right? You have to be all in. And if you're not, it could just mean that that goal you had in mind really isn't as important to you as you thought. So this approach can really be a great filter to see what it is you really care about and what you're willing to commit your time and attention to. All right, and reason number 3 is compounding. There it is again, y'all. So when you're in the middle of it, 30 minutes a day for 30 days in a row seems pretty minor. But once you finished it, what you really accomplished is 900 minutes of dedicated and focused effort towards a meaningful goal. Big goals are achieved through small, consistent action. So every little effort you put towards a meaningful goal will contribute to the overall picture. Now, if you do take on this approach, one thing to keep in mind is that Because the amount of time that we're working is limited to 30 minutes, we really have to focus on quality over quantity, right? It's not about how much work we do. It's about how good the work that we produce is. When you get into your 30 minutes of work, it doesn't matter which task you decided to take on, just make sure that you really focus in on it and you do it to the best of your ability. Now, sometimes this can be a little bit difficult, so here are 6 easy tips to help you achieve this. Tip number 1, decide what the task is and do only that. The goal here is focus, right? So we don't want to be doing 5 different things at a time. Pick one thing and stick to it for the entire time that you're going to be working. The reason why this is important is because you don't want your attention being pulled somewhere else. You want to give your undivided attention and focus to this one singular task so that you can do it the best you can. Tip number 2 is to stick to the time frame. Now with 30 for 30, this is decided for you, right? It's 30 minutes. But if you want to do something else, say 20, 40, an hour, make sure that you stick to that time. Once the time is up, you're done. Stop working, put it down, walk away. This is especially true if you're early in the process or new to focused work, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. If you become overwhelmed, your work won't be as good. So just put it down and walk away. Tip number 3 is simply to cut out all distractions. Do whatever you have to do to avoid distractions, right? Put your phone on do not disturb, leave it in another room, go work outside and leave all your personal belongings inside. Just make sure that you don't have anything that will interrupt you during the focused work time, because it'll be difficult to get back into that focus. Tip number 4, don't let yourself have 0 days. Now I've already mentioned this in the video, and in fact, the whole point of 30 for 30 is to have 30 days of work in a row, but it's important, and I actually want to stress it a little bit differently this time. Listen, some days will be harder than others. You won't feel up to the task, you won't feel motivated, and you won't feel like you'll be able to do your best work. But that's okay. On days like this, the goal is to just do something, right? Do enough to give yourself a starting point for when you are feeling up to the task. Then at that point, you can build on what you've already started, and you won't have to start from 0. This actually reminds me of another post I saw, which is a really good thing to remember in a situation like this. If you wake up on any given day and you feel that all you have that day is 40%, and you give that 40%, then you really gave 100% of your total efforts. Because you gave everything you had, right? So give yourself some grace. Tip number 5, reflect on your progress and celebrate how far you've come. You know, too often we get so caught up in how much more work there is to do or how much more progress there is to be made that we forget to recognize how far we've already come. Again, with the 30 for 30 approach, when you're halfway, you still have 15 days to go, right? But you've already done 450 minutes worth of work. That's almost 8 hours. And in that time, you've probably made some solid progress and have probably improved a lot. And it's super important to recognize these minor improvements and progress because it helps you not be discouraged. And it's sort of a positive reinforcement. When you start to recognize the progress that you've made, you see yourself as capable of making more progress and doing better work. And eventually you might even be able to work and focus for longer stretches of time. So whatever it is you're working on, don't skip on recognizing your progress and celebrating your wins. All right, my 6th and final tip to help you do your best work is to get started as soon as possible. Listen, y'all, at the end of the day, being productive does require hard work. And the longer you wait to get started, the longer it'll take for you to see improvements in your productivity. If you just keep telling yourself, oh, I'll get started tomorrow, the chances of you actually starting decrease significantly. I actually covered this topic in much more detail in this video, so check that out, and I'll see you there.